Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. Final days of a great BookTube event for 2023 where we celebrate Westerns, Western novels, Western short stories, that sort of thing. It was created by Michael K. Vaughan. It was enthusiastically embraced last year. I was spent all year looking forward to it this year, and I've been having a blast. I've been reading a ton of Westerns here in this June. This June, which did not feel like high summer, has felt like autumn here in Boston. A blanket on the bed on the 20th of June. Unheard of. But today I don't have a book for you. There's a few days more left for books. Today I have a tag. Randy Ray, the literate Texan, did another June on the Range tag. It's called the another Durn June on the Range tag, and the another refers to the fact that there is another June on the Range tag, one that I did myself at the beginning of the month. So we're starting and ending June on the Range with original tags. I did the Rootin' Tootin' June on the Range tag and was kind of amazed at how many people did that tag. Far more people than I think I'm really aware of. Dozens of people. Which is a testament to how much people love this event and Mike's channel. I think that's the reason for it. And Randy Ray decided to finish out the month with a June on the Range tag of his own, keyed to a list of signature or even his favorite Western movies. Here with a good deal of elasticity in that term, as you shall see. These are the prompts. I want to do this tag today instead of a book. Unless I find time. I could talk about the book I read last night. But the first prompt is Dead Man from 1995. How do you feel about the poetry of William Blake? Love it, hate it, or never read it? And of course, the third choice there is not an option for me. I have read everything by William Blake and a huge amount about Blake as well. But I don't share the starry-eyed, head over heels love of his verse that so many people I know and have known in my life feel. He is a figure in my own reading history very much like Charles Dickens, someone I would rather read about than read, and whose works have never really done anything for me, and probably for the same reason. They've seemed so prissily self-aware that half his poetry strikes me as sing-songy stuff straight out of a child garden of verse, and the rest of it seems incomprehensible to me. So I've tried Blake many, many times, but I despair now that I'm going to grow into his work. Sometimes an author just doesn't click with me, and I think right to the last that I might grow into their work. I don't think that's going to happen with Blake. I'm distinctly ambivalent when it comes to his work. Number two is Blazing Saddles. Here's a movie, a choice of Randy's I completely agree with. Blazing Saddles is amazing. Unless you are a blue checkmark scold, you will be surgically humorless anyway, so you wouldn't watch a comedy except to get it banned. But if you're anything else, if you're a normal person, it is one of the funniest movies that's ever been made. And it's infinitely rewatchable. Just infinitely rewatchable. I love it. I know huge parts of it. Behart. Here I stand, the goddess of desire, set men on fire. I have this power. Morning, noon, and night, it's drink and dancing, some quick romancing, and then a shower. And the prompt here is, what's your relationship like with trains and railroads? Have you ever taken a trip by train, and if so, what was it like? I have an extensive relationship with trains and railroads. Extensive. Not only because I lived in India, where they're kind of the baseline for a lot of transportation. If you have not traveled on a packed train in India, you're missing out on an experience. I am most certainly not saying that you are missing out on a good experience, but you're missing out on an experience. But also all over Russia and a lot of other places too, all over Europe. The thing that Americans don't get is how ubiquitous and how convenient train systems are in most of the rest of the world. And that's extra ironic because America has a paltry and ridiculous federally subsidized train system, and it stinks. It's great in and of itself. I am a big fan of Amtrak, which is our train system, our national train system. I'm a big fan of Amtrak. I have ridden their rails pretty much every trip that they have to offer. The long ones, the famous ones all across the country. But if you take a look at America's train map and compare it to the train map density of Europe or Japan or wherever you want to look, it's minuscule. It's like a tenth of the country that's covered. Granted, it's the big hubs of the East Coast and the West Coast, but even in those hubs, there isn't anything like the track distribution that you'd want to see. I'm just hoping that sooner or later the Trump administration gets around to Infrastructure Week, because it would be great if America pumped money into that. Talk about a green solution to congested highways. But I still use the Amtrak, even though it's not nearly what it should be in America. I've still used it extensively. And I love it. Absolutely love it. I much prefer train rides where, with a wink and maybe slip a $100 bill to the conductor or the porter, I can have a dog with me, or more than one dog with me. I like it if I like the old days when you could do that. For those of you who are new to this channel, I've done a lot of traveling in my life, but I did it a long time ago. And during those years, it was often true that money would get a little bit of flexibility in the rules. I'm not sure that that's true anymore, now that every second person in America is a lawyer and every second person in America is armed. I don't think there's any leeway like that anymore. But in those days, and also a lot everywhere else in the world, I had enormous amounts of fun on trains. Absolutely love it. And despite all that time on all those different railways and all those different countries, I've never been in any kind of a collision. I guess that's lucky, or maybe they just aren't. They aren't all that common. If you spend an hour watching train collisions on YouTube, then you might start to think they happen all the time. Probably I've skewed my perception that way. But the worst that I've ever had was it was part of my journey on Russia's famous railway, and we stopped and just nothing could be done at all. We were in the middle of nowhere and nothing could be done at all. So we just had to wait. And when a relief engine came, they had to just knock the car that we'd been occupying off the track. There was nowhere to put it, and there was no way that you were going to push it to its destination. So it had to be just tipped over sideways. That was time consuming and harrowing, but it wasn't a crash. It wasn't a collision. Then prompt number 3 is Hell or High Water, which is from 2016. Have you ever been to West Texas? And if so, what did you think of the experience? I have been to West Texas because aside from Australia and New Guinea, aside from the Australian archipelago, I have been everywhere. So if you're tempted to ask me a have you ever been question, you can answer it yourself. You can save us both the time. If you're going to ask me, have you ever been to, and the thing after the to is not Australia or New Guinea, the answer is yes. It's simple as that. I've been everywhere else. Every inch of ground. And you might say, oh, well, you've probably been to the big city down the block from me, but not every inch. No, every inch. The ground on which your house now stands. I am making this video from your backyard. So I have been over every inch of West Texas with dogs, including a large amount of time in a very large and beautiful but extremely inhospitable desert that is a large chunk of it falls in West Texas. I've been all through that particular desert, inch by inch, plant by plant, rattlesnake by rattlesnake. But also I had a young married couple who were friends of mine in Lubbock, Texas, which is in West Texas, and I visited them, and we had a really fun time. And the young man I had known when he was here in Boston. Well, I'd known him. That's fair. That's accurate. And he said, when I was in Boston, you showed me your arboretum. And that's absolutely true. I live near a very beautiful arboretum. And he said, I'd love to show you my arboretum. It's not a patch on yours, but I'd love you to see it. It's kind of pretty. And he took me to a lovely arboretum. The arboretum in Lubbock, at least back then, I don't know if it's still around. Maybe it's a parking lot now. But back then, it was there, and it was lovely. He was selling it short. It was not as big as the arboretum near me, I don't think, unless we didn't see all of it. But we went there. He and his wife and I went there on a boiling hot day, beautiful day, but boiling hot. And I remember it vividly. We just strolled around that arboretum and had this wonderful time talking about it and just enjoying ourselves. You get acclimated to the Texas heat, maybe not the kind of heat they're having right now, but you get acclimated to it, and I was by that point. And I remember we were in that arboretum. My friends had said before we left, could you do us a favor and maybe leave the dogs here just for this walk? We'll go to the arboretum. We'll go to a restaurant. Do we have to bring the dogs along? Can't you leave them here? And I was always willing to oblige. I had a lot of beagles at that time, so it wasn't like I was leaving a dog alone in a strange apartment. I would never do that. But they were all together, and the leader of that group of beagles was not part of that litter. He had belonged to the previous litter, so he was pretty old. He and I knew each other really, really well, and he was kind of my shop foreman when it came to the others. I made sure to tell him, sir, make sure that they don't panic and that they don't destroy anything. I'll be back. So I was in the park without my dogs, and we noticed off in the distance this big, muscular, sort of pit bull, mastiff type thing, dog that was running around. It was just running up to trees, up down lawns and across open spaces, up to people who were a little bit tense. One couple pulled their baby in a little closer, and there was no owner anywhere around that we could see. And my friends were tut-tutting between themselves, saying, oh, can you believe this? That is so irresponsible. I mean, what if this dog isn't friendly? What if somebody's afraid of it? And then they looked at me, and they both had the same reaction. Their reaction was, no, because they knew it was too late. By the time they had done that, that dog and I, across, 200, 300 yards, had seen each other. We had made eye contact. And I dropped down into a sort of a baseball catcher's position. I squatted down, and I said, come to me, give me kisses all over my face. And he charged towards me, just charged in a straight line, straight at me. My friends actually made like they were going to back up behind me. They were worried that they were going to die. I think that he was a heat-seeking missile or something. He raced up to me and covered my face in smooches. Oh my God, it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Eventually I stood up, and he stood up with me. His paws were on my shoulders, and he was still just going nuts on my face, while his owner had finally located him visually and was coming up to, rushing up to make sure that the dog wasn't biting my face off or something like that. And I was so happy at that exchange. My friends were cracking up by this point. I never heard the end of it for the rest of that night. They told the waitress at the restaurant. But I was so happy at that encounter that I went pretty easy on the owner. Ordinarily, I don't. In a situation like that, ordinarily, I put a high priority. You'd never guess it from how obnoxious I am on this channel. But I put a high priority on courtesy, on friendliness. I'm a very friendly person, a friendly extrovert to strangers. But not if you're gonna do something like that. Not if you're gonna be irresponsible. The Lubbock dog catcher could have taken this thing and ruined everything, killed the animal. If you didn't get him back in a week, maybe he'd have been executed. And also, the dog could have got the wrong signal from some other human, or, God forbid, from some other dog. It was totally irresponsible, and I made mention of that fact to the owner, who was very apologetic. But I didn't harp on it. Ordinarily, I'm pretty strict about that sort of thing, but I was so happy at being face smooched that I did. So yes, I do have experience with West Texas. I've been over every inch of it. Prompt number 4 is The Searchers, a great John Wayne movie that you should all see if you haven't seen it. Have you ever pursued a goal or obsession for 5+ years? If so, what was it, and what was the experience like? Did you succeed? I thought about this for a while, and I don't know about obsession, but pursuing a goal for a large amount of years, yes. I have done that more than once. I am currently doing that with my gig as the books editor at Big Canoe News in Northern Georgia, a monthly print newspaper. Some of you have done me the extreme honor of subscribing to Big Canoe so that you get it in the mail, where I am the books editor. And I am not the books editor under the authority of the arts and entertainment editor running a book review a month or something like that. Big Canoe has a dedicated 2-page full-color book section, just books. And I'm the editor of that section. We do not do local books. We do not do popular favorites. We do new releases. It's a legitimate, all-purpose, new release book section. We usually have a column, maybe 2 columns, and plenty of book reviews every month. I intentionally took the job and designed it so that it would be a legitimate book section very much smaller than something you would get in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. And I am on a long-term mission there to build its profile, to get it better known. I don't think that either the newspaper world or the book publishing world knows that this book section is out there. I don't think they do, and they should. So that's a long-term mission. I've been at that for a couple of years. I am slowly raising our profile. We just won a regional award from the Georgia Press Association. I believe that we will have our first 1 or 2 named book blurbs for Big Canoe, the Big Canoe book section. That's a huge deal. That's actually a bigger deal than an award, because that's going to be in bookstores all over the country. Those used books, used copies of those, are going to get all over the world. As you know, since you've flipped over used books from all over the world and read excerpted book reviews, book blurbs on them. But also before that, there was Open Letters Review. Open Letters Monthly was the online literary journal that preceded Open Letters Review, which is ongoing now online, and where I am one of the editors. In 2006 and 2007, 2 friends of mine created Open Letters Monthly, a monthly online literary journal that had original reviews, long think pieces, original poetry. A lot of our opening issues had original photographs as well. And we put that issue together every month. And after a little while, I became the managing editor. And in addition to writing for Open Letters and standing back to watch my far more talented co-editors write, I also had a long-standing mission, definitely 5+ years, which was to get us known. Pretty much the same mission as I have for Big Canoe, only it was more difficult, because Big Canoe is actually a printed newspaper, which still has a kind of old school cachet to it, whereas an online thing doesn't. So I wanted to recontact the publishing world. I had been a book reviewer years and years before, and I had to reestablish that, start that momentum going, where the publishing world starts to recognize you. You start to get on more and more mailing lists. You start to get more and more review copy requests approved. This was before NetGalley or anything like that. I wanted very much, I worked at it steadily, 5 days a week for years, to get us known to the publishing world, which entails learning who the publicists are, finding out who's handling which things, establishing relationships with them, getting books, and making sure those books get reviewed, and then that the publicist and the publishers and the author know that it was reviewed and know that it was reviewed well. It isn't just that Open Letters Monthly was producing book reviews, it's that we were producing really good book reviews. That was a long-standing project, and it worked. It worked. After a couple of years, Open Letters Monthly was punching well above our weight class in terms of getting noticed, in terms of industry approval, in terms of respect. So I would call that a success. It wasn't my own success alone, but I worked real hard at it. Then prompt number 5 is Bone Tomahawk. And this is, what are your favorite Lost World / Lost Race books, if any? I have to admit, this isn't one of my favorite gimmicks. Never really has been. So I don't have a long list of favorites. The one that came to mind was, works in a way, it's the Pliesian Exile books of Julian May, where in the future, in Earth, a time portal is discovered in a valley in France. And you go through it and you go to the Pliocene on Earth, millions of years in the past. It's a one-way trip. It's not a handy time portal you can just step back into. If you try to make the return trip, you take on those 6 million years and you arrive back in France as a pile of dust. But you can go one way, and it's taken on a kind of a niche popularity in this future world. There are some people, misfits, outcasts, adventure junkies, who want that one-way trip. They're willing to risk it. They know all that science can tell them about the Pliocene era. Very primitive hominidae, very primitive, upright apes, and lots of monstrous animals. And what they don't know, what no one in that future world of Earth knows, is that millions of years ago in the Pliocene, alien spacecraft crashed on Earth. And that every human being who's gone through that portal is immediately made a slave by those aliens. No one in the present knows that. There's no way for anyone to know that. And I guess that counts, doesn't it, as a lost world? Maybe even 2 kinds of lost world, because those chrononaut wayfarers are not only experiencing the Pliocene, they're also experiencing this alien encounter every time they go through Maybe that counts. I don't know. I don't know if it does or not. Then prompt number 6 is Mad Max. If I had a dime for every time somebody has told me that Mad Max is a Western, I'd have a lot of dimes to hurl at the faces of the people who call Mad Max a Western. The prompt is, what's your relationship like with cars and driving? If you drive, are you an aggressive driver or a defensive driver or somewhere in between? And I don't have a direct relationship with cars and driving. I have never driven a car. I've never sat behind the wheel of a car. I have no idea how to do it. Never had a driver's license. Never will have a driver's license. I'm sure that I would be bad at it, considering how completely my attention is consumed when I spot a dog. But I've been a passenger in cars for 80 million years. I have just 80 million times in almost every continent on Earth, in almost every condition, almost every kind of vehicle, often me and the dogs in the back of a truck, but plenty of times without dogs, just driving, long, late night driving in blinding snowstorms, driving in the summer heat in Texas, where a rainstorm washes over your car. It comes out of a bright day, it washes over your car. You're in a driving downpour for 10 minutes. Then it washes off your car, it moves on. You keep driving on the road, and eventually you get to a straight line on the road. That's where the rain stops. And usually I'm extremely well behaved. Usually I am, almost always. I don't get motion sickness, so I can quietly read. But I also make good conversation in a car. And since I don't really sleep the way a normal person does, although I can never spell someone with driving, I can keep a driver interested. I can keep them occupied the whole time, as long as they need me to. I've only been unruly as a pastor a couple of times. One time that comes to mind, I had an old friend, and when he was very young, he was beautiful, and we drove cross country from Iowa to Boston. Then we had lots of fun in Boston, and then we drove all the way back, Boston to Iowa. And we had a thing, he and I did. Like so many other people in this tag, he's long dead. My two young hosts in Lubbock, long dead. That dog, long dead. That dog's owner, I'm sure, long dead. But this friend, when he was a young boy, a big, muscular, beautiful boy, we had this thing that developed naturally between the two of us, where every once in a while we would be just talking, we would decide that we wanted to shrilly escalate the conversation until we were screaming at each other. And it was never a planned thing. There was never any kind of a code word. It was just, we would suddenly do that. And it would crack us up. It didn't necessarily crack anybody else up, but it cracked us up. And one time we were driving on a road late at night. We'd had a bad thunderstorm. We were coming out of it. Just dark road in the middle of Ohio, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Just going on and on and on and on and on. And we were chatting and trying to decide, I think we were trying to decide whether or not we needed to find a hotel. Maybe he needed some sleep. But in the middle of that conversation, out of the blue, we just decided to do one of those escalations into screaming at each other. And to top it off, once we got to the pinnacle of it, I reached over from the passenger seat and started throttling him by the neck. And he's grabbing the wheel. And we're weaving all over like that, cracking up. Both of us just cracking up. And then we gained control. After a minute or two, we gained control of the car and just kept going. And all I could think was, in later years, all I could think was, what if there'd been a cop around there? What would I have been able to say if he pulled us over? Is there a problem? Oh, no, officer. I was just trying to murder my friends. Anyway, I'm usually a very well-behaved passenger. Then prompt number 7 is Unforgiven. Very moving movie, very weird Clint Eastwood movie. I strongly recommend it if you haven't seen it. Critics at the time said Clint Eastwood is intentionally trying to make the very last Western. I'm not so sure that isn't true. The prompt is, what's your relationship with money like, especially as it compares to your relationship with people? And when it comes to my relationship with money, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess, and it always has been. I don't understand it at all. Not at all. I don't have any ability to make it. I don't have any ability to keep it when I am making it. If I have it, I either ignore it or I give it away. I don't have any sense of it or of its nature, its mathematics, it's anything like that. It's the opposite of David Murphy, if you can picture that. And those of you who know who David Murphy is, it's the opposite of David Murphy. I am terrible with money, just terrible with it. It's an absolute godsend that my surly houseboy handles all of that, because otherwise it would be an absolute mess. just the stereotypical thing that you think of when you think of someone who's bad with money. Someone who has the money for the electric bill, but nevertheless, in 6 months, the electricity is shut off because there are 5 bills just sitting there under a paperweight because the person just hasn't got around to doing it. It's terrible. Absolutely, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. It doesn't prey on me. I guess that's the only positive, is that it doesn't preoccupy me. But otherwise, oh my, I could well stand to take a remedial course of some kind. Then prompt number 8 is Django, but this is not Django Unchained. Have you ever been involved in a feud of any kind? If so, what was that like? Leaving aside for the minute here whether or not all of my marriages to Deb have been feud-like, there's also the fact that I don't make much of it on this channel, but I am 100% Irish Catholic. It's not that I have the last name Donoghue and maybe a descendant here and an ancestor here and there. It's totally 100% Irish Catholic on both sides of the family, going back to Brian Boru, going back to the Battle of the Boyne. It's 100% that. And there's a scholarly tradition. There's a rumor that I actually grew up in a very fractious Irish Catholic household. And in Irish Catholic culture and in Irish Catholic households, especially if they're undiluted, everything is a feud. Your loved ones, your marriages, your friendships, they're all feuds. So I would say that I know quite a bit about what it's like to be in a feud, yes. And it's thrilling. Get you out of bed in the morning. Then prompt number 9 is the Golden Stallion from 1949. Have you ever had a friendship with an animal that was more important to you than most of your relationships with human beings? If so, what was that like? Yes, I have. Yes. I was not raised by humans. I was raised by dogs. I was raised and socialized by a different species. And they have always had my heart. In a far different way than people you meet who say, "Oh, I'm a dog person." Absolutely, it's a far different way than that. It's a lot more basal to who I am, and as a result, 90% of my close personal relationships in my life have been with dogs and not with humans. The tiny handful of humans who reach that inner circle, that I'm not meaning to make it seem all that great, but the ones that get to the point where I regard them with the same kind of importance and intimacy, same kind of immediacy as dogs, they tend to know that number's not very big. I'm a very genial, outgoing, friendly, extroverted guy. Friendly as the day is long. But deep, meaningful relationships, deep personal relationships, those are with my own kind. There's no language barrier. I don't view them as merely dogs. They're not cogs or wind-up toys or anything like that. They're not lesser beings at all. So, yeah, I have had deep personal relationships with beings who weren't human, definitely. I've also had deep friendships with beings who weren't human, and not just dogs. Pigs are actually wonderful people. They're easily possible to make a close friend of a pig. Easily. They're pretty outgoing. They're a little more guarded than most dogs, but they're pretty outgoing once they get to know you, once they become familiar with you. And they're wonderful. If anything, they have a better innate sense of humor than dogs do. Probably because there's a lot less status jockeying in them naturally. Dogs, even the most domesticated and interbred kind of breed of dog, there's a lot of status jockeying. Status is a big thing. And that can impede sense of humor. Whereas pigs don't tend to have that. Not as much. But when it comes to the deepest personal relationships, it's dogs. So yes, the answer to this question is an emphatic yes. If there's one thing that when we're talking, if I'm talking with someone, if there's one thing that's guaranteed to just completely wipe the smile off my face, it's when someone says something along the lines of, "It was just a dog." And if there's one thing that's bound to produce a tipsy rant, or if we're watching the late night news here at Hyde Cottage, it's the story of people who knew there was a hurricane coming to their household and packed up grandma, filled it with the station wagon, and left the dog behind. As happens every time there is a hurricane, you get stories like that. Many, many stories like that. Infuriates me. Absolutely infuriates me. To say nothing of dog experimentation, which happens here in Boston every day. It happens near where you are every day. Oh, don't even get me started. But yes, the answer to this question is an emphatic yes. And as to exactly what it's like, the exact description of what it's like is not something that I can do. I've tried many times, so there's no way that I can do it. But it's wonderful. And then prompt number 10, Battle Beyond the Stars. You see, I think that some of these choices by Randy, Bone Tomahawk, are really weird. But it's the wonder of this little corner of BookTube that, weird as they are, the fact that they're coming from someone that I watch, someone whose aesthetic and personal judgments I'm coming to know, will probably mean that I will seek these things out and watch them again with fresh eyes. The same way as with reading a book. That you're watching someone, you watch 10 of their videos, they hold up a book and you think, oh yeah, I know all about what I think about that book, but then you listen to them talk, suddenly you're open to it again. I've had that happen a million times on BookTube with movies as well as books, so it will probably happen. But this prompt is, what was the first science fiction movie you ever saw in the movie theater? And here at the movie theater is going to be stretched just a little. It was a drive-in movie theater, and I wasn't there as a paying customer. I had discovered a perch on a hilltop that gave me a very good view of the drive-in screen, but I didn't have a car. I didn't know how to drive a car, and I also had a big team of dogs with me that would not have been welcome in the actual lot of a drive-in. So we used to go up to that hill and just sort of make ourselves comfortable in the woods, and I would watch the movie with my boys. They weren't watching, but I was watching. And the first one that I saw, the first movie that I saw was the first science fiction movie that I saw was The Time Machine. George Pal's The Time Machine. And I was young, and I didn't get it at all. It was a road diverging in a yellow wood. I could easily have become someone who didn't get science fiction at all. Because I looked at the thing and I thought, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. You can't go to the past. The past has already happened. It's not a place that you can go to. It's already happened. And you certainly can't go to the future since it hasn't happened yet. You might be able to visit the past in your memories, but you can't. There's no future that you can go to. It's not like you're just a slot on a ruler. So I saw this movie that was entirely based on the past and the present and the future being places, discrete places, instead of functions of time. And I thought, oh, well, what on earth is this? That doesn't make any sense at all. Lucky thing that I didn't freeze that way, or I would have missed out on a lifetime of watching science fiction movies and really enjoying them. You need to make your peace with time travel if you're going to enjoy science fiction on the page or on the screen. So, although even way back then, I may have been originally tempted to agree with Subcommander T'Pol, the Vulcan Science Academy has determined that time travel is impossible. I eventually warmed up. I never quite warmed up to that particular movie, but I eventually warmed up to science fiction on the screen. The movie that really did it for me was not The Time Machine, and it was also not 2001. It was a movie called Silent Running that I saw in the movie theater. I didn't have a team of dogs with me. I saw it by myself in a movie theater, and I got it. I thought it was beautifully done, but I also got it. I remember vividly thinking, I get science fiction now. I know exactly why someone would like this. I know what distinguishes this from just cowboys and Indians in space. This is actually science fiction, and I get it. And that was the beginning of a long love affair with science fiction movies, old and new, after that point. Including science fiction parody, of course. I love, there's a science fiction movie called Dark Star that I don't think is known anymore. That's a shame, where the alien is quite obviously a beach ball. And that has all sorts of nods of the hat, tops of the hat, to science fiction ridiculousness. I just love teach the bomb phenomenology. I don't know how available Dark Star is or if anybody knows it now, but I loved it. And I loved Silent Running and just kept going from there. So the first science fiction movie that I saw in the theater really didn't bode well. It wasn't the harbinger, an indicator of how much I was going to love the genre on the screen. It turned out I loved it a lot. I just I didn't love my first exposure to it. And that is it. That is another Durn June on the Range book tag. And I loved it. I think this is just a terrific tag. I hope you all do it. I'm going to tag anyone who's watching June on the Range. What a nice bit of symmetry to start with a tag and end with one. Both original tags for the event. So I'm gonna wrap this up. It looks like clouds are cutting off my light here. So I'm gonna wrap this up. But I'll be back to a few more June on the Range novels next time. Next time we gather by the campfire. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.